This is always a very special day and a very special occasion for us when we have the opportunity to showcase four of our very best. We refer to our superintendents as champions for children and public education, and you will soon learn that indeed we have four of the best right here who do that for their children. Yeah. So, just to, Wendy Robinson is from the superintendent in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and David Schuler is the superintendent in District 214 in Arlington Heights, Illinois. And Mary Sue is the superintendent of the ABC district out in California. And Mike Winstead is superintendent in Tennessee, where we're going to be having our national conference next month. Exactly. So we're so delighted to have them here for this afternoon. And we're very pleased to have as the moderator for this event a member of the press. Daryl Burnett is the state policy reporter with Ed Week. And Daryl, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this panel. And before I turn it to Daryl, I do want to acknowledge what makes this possible for us. And that's two of the sponsors that sponsor our National Superintendent of the Year program. We have Todd Steele with First Student. Todd? And John Keevan. Where's John? There's John with Valley. And thank you both and your companies for making this possible. Daryl, it's all yours.
All right, so I'm going to ask our panelists four questions and then kind of open up to the audience. So first, I'm going to ask you guys maybe name one thing that's going well in your district. We'll start with you, Wendy.
This may sound unusual, but I think the most important thing going well in our district is that we realize that we have to constantly be in a mode of continuous improvement. That any success we had yesterday has to be examined to make sure that we are ahead of the accountability changes, the diversity of our student body. And so for us, our zeroing in the laser focus on curriculum and ensuring that kids have a quality, rigorous education, but then the understanding that we have really got to focus on the supports we have to wrap around every single child to make sure they achieve those targets. And so I think us knowing that we don't really have it right yet, but we do know what we need to be doing.
David.
Thanks. I think one of the things that we're really excited about is that we're doing our best to remove all the barriers to access, affordability, and opportunity for our students to be able to earn early college credit and to dream of life beyond high school. And I think that's what our goal is. It's important that we focus on graduation, but only to ensure that our kids are successful after graduation. That's how we should be judged as school system leaders. And so we've got an initiative, the Power of 15, where all students will have access to 15 college credits by the time they graduate. We also have a program that's starting with this year's sophomore class where all students, unless they have significant special education needs, will graduate with 6 credits of college, early college credit. So really proud of that. Every child will have that opportunity. In addition to providing 3,000 workplace learning experiences a year, so every student in our district over the course of their 4 years will have an external workplace learning experience to ensure that they find out either what they want to do or, more importantly, what they don't want to do. Right? I'd rather have that with us than after they and their families spend 2 or 3 years worth of college making that decision. So I'm really excited about finding ways to reduce the barriers to access, affordability, and opportunity for all students to dream beyond high school.
Before I share what we're excited about, that we're very proud of in our efforts in ABC Unified School District, I think it's important to know a little bit about the school district called ABC Unified. For some of you who may not be even aware of it being a real district, because whenever I say to people, I represent ABC Unified School District, they're always saying, is that a real district like XYZ? And I would have to tell them, yes, it is. We're located in the southeast corner of Los Angeles County. We have 10 preschools, 19 elementary schools, 5 middle schools, 5 high schools, with a very robust, the 6th largest adult school in California, with over 31,000 students. 93% of our students are ethnically diverse, with only about less than 7% who are Caucasian white students. In addition, 51% are on their free and reduced lunch program, so we have a very large poverty rate in our district, as well as the fact that our students, again, 1 in 5 students are English learners. So with just that background in mind, the thing that we have been very proud of succeeding the last 6 years is to be able to increase our graduation rate that used to be at 91%. But it's not just increasing the graduation rate. As of last year, 2017, it's now at 98%. And that is for not the whole district, it means for every student in each of our schools. So that means that for our African American students, our English learners, our low socioeconomic students, our students who are from each of the different groups, our Hispanic Latino students, are at 97 to 98%. And we're very proud of that because just like what David said, we're also very vested into knowing what are they doing after they graduate from our schools. And so for our most highest high poverty school, high school that serves our district, we noticed that all the students who graduated in 2017 were accepted in colleges and universities. It's important to recognize that we serve also 5 very distinct, very diverse communities in Los Angeles County. Artesia, Cerritos, Hawaiian Gardens, and portions of Lakewood, Norwalk, and Long Beach are the communities that we serve. It's one of the most ethnically diverse cities or school districts in the country, and I am very glad I'm part of this district for the last 28 years.
You know, I think for us in Maryville, one of the things we're doing better than we've ever done before is teacher support, just providing teachers the support and the resources they need to be better. You know, we don't have a great track record in our country, research would say, of moving marginal teachers to average or average teachers to effective or highly effective. And if we want to if we know that teaching and teachers are the most important factor to a student's success, then, you know, I certainly feel that my most important job and the most important job of my school administrators is the support we provide them and the development, what we give them professional development wise to move them to that next level. And so we've tied everything nicely together. And I think back to the days when I was in the classroom and we had 1 or 2 evaluations a year, and then maybe you go 5 years without an evaluation, and now we have a system in place, you know, where that school administrator and administrative team is in those classrooms all the time, you know, looking for those persistent, pervasive, consistent practices that are being done in those classrooms, providing the feedback that's going to move those teachers. I mean, that's really what we want. You know, when you think about individuals, any of us, you know, we're willing to change if you can show us that we need to change. You know, give a vision, or, you know, give us a picture of how we can do things better or do something better. But then secondly, just as important, you got to make sure that that person sees that they themselves can get there. You know, so if you can cast that vision, but if you don't provide the support and professional development necessary to move that individual teacher at his or her needs. We talk about teachers differentiating instruction in the classroom, meeting the needs of each kid individually. That's what we've got to do as school and school administrators, is we've got to differentiate our approach and personalize it so that that teacher and administrator are sitting down, identifying strengths and weaknesses for that individual teacher, developing a plan so that no 2 teachers should have the same professional development experience in a school year because they don't have the same needs. And so we're seeing concrete evidence of moving marginal teachers to average and average teachers to highly effective, and the goal being that we have a highly effective teacher in front of every classroom.
All right. What policies coming down from the federal government or your state government are you excited about, and which do you dread?
I think the conversation at the federal level can be distressing, because I'm not quite sure that we're having a conversation around education. And unfortunately, in my state, we are mirroring the federal conversation. So for us, when I talked about continuous improvement, it's incumbent upon districts to take that responsibility. Our state's involved in currently changing the graduation pathways. We're into college and career. I think all of us are doing exactly the same kinds of things because it's really, that's the mantra. But I think the part that is, I have to be positive about is that we really know as much as we need to know to really do the job at the district level. We just have to be brave enough to break away from what we keep thinking are all the regulations that keep us from doing that. So in our district, what we're focused on, when I talked about continuous improvement, it's this concept of this pyramid. I'm a Michael Fullen zealot. I'm a stalker. Because I think he just simplistically defines how you get education done. And the conversation around the pyramid, where one side is academic and the other side is readiness to learn, that's the same thing for students as it is for teachers. So we are heavily involved in becoming a learning district. And we have to demonstrate to the adults that we always try to change kids, but we never really look at what we as adults need to do to change our performance so that kids have better opportunities. We're entering into a partnership with the Dana Center out of the University of Texas and Centerpoint because our curriculum is just stale. It's stagnant. It does well for kids who came reading. It does not do well. Whereas 79%, it's about 70% free and reduced lunch. But I have a child from every country in the world in my district. So all of them aren't going to learn the same. And so the curriculum we have works well for those that would do well no matter where they are. So when you look at all of that, you look at the fact that we have to be a professional learning community, we have to know what it is kids are supposed to have, then we have to have connections with community partners. So I know this it may sound arrogant, but I've stopped worrying about the state and federal government, because whatever they're going to do, they're going to do. And whatever money I'm going to get, I'm going to get. But we have to be responsible for defining education in the Fort Wayne community schools. And parents want to know, I send them to you when they graduate, what are they going to be capable of doing? So that's what we're working on, defining that. And then making sure that the adults can deliver. The kids aren't the problem. It's whether the adults are going to be able to deliver.
Gotcha. David?
And I would say from a policy perspective, we're very interested in keeping our eyes on the prize as it relates to the AASA accountability workbooks and ensuring that the data we're collecting will help inform states when they have to do their second workbook, 4 years from now, and ensuring that we're capturing data that's going to be helpful to states to move us off of judging us based on a test score and our kids on a test score. I think, so from that perspective, I think there's optimism, and I also think there's great reason for pause, because every state's handling those conversations differently. I also think, I'm very interested in seeing if Perkins gets any legs this year or not, but we need to stay really engaged in that work, because it allows us the flexibility to do a lot of the great things from the college and career readiness perspective. I also think, and I'm very excited about HEA, and if the Higher Ed Act is going to get reauthorized. I think that we should push in legislation that if you are able to teach an advanced placement course, or you're a nationally board certified teacher or an IB teacher, you should be able to teach a 100 level college class for dual credit. I think that should happen, and I think our accrediting agencies aren't necessarily interested in engaging in that conversation, so perhaps HEA is the way for us to work. That being said, I think the thing I'm most concerned about right now is CHIP. Right, and making sure that something happens, and I saw this morning that perhaps the bill was going to be called next week. But if you think about the work Sharon and AASA do, providing services to over 1.2 million children a year between breakfast and helping them sign up for children's health insurance, the fact that that's lapsed right now, and everybody says it's bipartisan, if it's really bipartisan, then please just get it done.
One of the things that I'm very pleased with that is taking place in California, according to our state superintendent, Tom Torlakson, he calls it the California Way, are the things that have been a part of our new accountability plan for the last 4 years. The local control accountability plan, which has been in place, allowing districts to merge over 45 different categorical programs now into a single program, and having districts decide what the priorities are for the communities that we serve. That has, in the last, again, 4 years for us, has made a huge difference, and the reasons why our students are engaged, are expected to come to school, as well as to graduate on time. So one of the factors, for example, that the LCAP, that we call it, has allowed us to do is to really focus on addressing the social emotional needs of our district. As a result, we have partnered with the USC and the School of Social Work to be able to provide a social worker at every single one of our 30 schools, as well as wellness coordinators, because we know that beyond the single academic score of a test, there's so much more that goes on, and to be able to go back to the focus on the whole child is where we're heading right now in California. And so we don't have in our new accountability system just a single test score that determines whether a school district, or a teacher is effective. We now have a multiple measures approach that includes other areas. For example, the percentage of our students graduating on time, our students who are ready for college and career, the students who are suspended, and by different ethnic groups. All of these things are now a part of our new accountability plan that we are all expected to reach and to exceed as well. And I think that our district is doing a very good job in each of these areas. It allows us to take a look at something beyond just the test scores, to know that our students and our parents are truly engaged. As far as what do we dread, I will dread the time when we have to reverse ourselves to go back to when we were defined by an academic performance index with one test score, because we know that that is simply not enough. It doesn't color the picture of how well our students are doing with just one test score given on one single date. So I'm glad that we're moving in this new direction in California. And again, in working with the federal system, we're hoping that they will approve of our plan, our accountability plan, which I think has really taken off and has done a tremendous amount of benefit for all students in our district.
Well, I think in Tennessee, we've been fortunate. We've had 16 years of two great governors, Democrat Bredesen and Republican Haslam, that have put in a huge investment in education, and it's starting to pay off. I mean, we're seeing, Tennessee kind of come out of the bottom of the heap, if you will, and at least be in the middle in the conversation nationally. And we finally have standards and assessments that are aligned, they're rigorous. We're expecting as much out of students in Tennessee as anywhere in the country, and I put our standards up against anyone in the country, and that's a far cry from anything I've seen in my 30 years in working in Tennessee. So there's some good things. The evaluation system I mentioned earlier was a great change under the leadership of Bredesen and Haslam to require that every year evaluation and move teachers forward. So there's a lot of good things. We have an accountability system approved under AASA that's the fairest we've seen since No Child Left Behind kicked off 16 years ago. It has the Ready Graduate that includes some of the things under Dave's work. We're looking at the defining ready, where it's not just ACT scores, but we're talking about industry certifications and opportunities for early post-secondary opportunities and work-based learning. All of those could be used to define ready, and that ready graduate measure that's part of our accountability. And that's the right focus. I mean, we're still looking at graduation rate of how many get across the stage, but now, asking the question, what do they look like? What caliber of student are we putting across the stage with that deployment? So those are good things, but we're teetering. The good things we have, we've got to, of course, I'm very worried mostly about the governor's race this year, because there's a lot of candidates, maybe 8 out of the 9 that's going to destroy us, but that's neither here nor there. But at the end, we have the A through F legislation that passed, and that's, our legislators just adjourned for the new session, I guess, this week, and if they only pass one bill, that's what I've asked mine to do. Educationally pass one bill, and that's to rescind that. We're sponsoring that through our state organization, and thought we had it defeated last year. Hopefully we'll get it taken out this year, and if that's all they do, I'd be happy. We need some stability. We need just to maintain some things as we wrap arms around the new standards and assessments and move forward. So there's a lot of good things that are happening there, but again, it's on the other side, it's how quickly things can change, as we all know, just with one election or anything like that happens.
What role do you think district superintendents have in today's political environment?
I'm laughing because I think we almost are political figures, and I think that I keep encouraging my colleagues in Indiana to stop waiting until the shoe falls to act. I think we have to represent our communities, and in particular in districts like mine, where the diversity of the district mirrors the diversity of the community. We have to be spokespersons for people who can't speak for themselves. I am actively involved in trying to make sure the details for the pathways that were passed and created by people who are not a part of the educational system, that the details don't kill us. I think I got off the phone this morning with a parent who finally, after 6 months, figured out that there were pathways and wants to rally the troops. My job is to make sure that she has accurate information and that what parents are talking to legislators about will be helpful. So I think that if there's anything that I think we have done as superintendents is we've allowed some things to happen because we're such polite. I'm a third grade teacher, and we're all so polite. But when you ask the question about what we can be excited about and what we are afraid of, in my 40-something career, this is the first time I'm afraid of everything, because I think decisions are being made around education by people who don't understand what the true value of public education is. And so for me, if we don't stand up, not trying to shout and be louder than the people who are trying to, the whole voucher and charter and making education a business, we've just got to figure out how we tell our stories, because every last one of us in my district, my graduation rate is either at the state average or above every single year. All the work I say we need to do on curriculum is not because what we're doing is wrong, it's just not good enough. So I think our roles have to be the ones who are constantly having people know this is a continuous improvement process. You can celebrate what we did yesterday, but we better hurry up because we needed to be 2 weeks ahead in our thinking. And one of the things we don't do is to be political. And being political means, I'll just say this and then I'll stop. I was never more proud of superintendents in Indiana than I was a month ago, when every last superintendent stood up and told our state board that your pathway plan is wrong. For 2 days, superintendents brought parents and teachers and stood up and said as a group that it was wrong. Now, it passed anyway. But that was the first time that the organization got together and got us together to give examples, not just whine, but give examples. So that's kind of become my new mission, is to keep people honest, and that we tell our story and describe how we know you passed it, but here are all the things you need to be responsible for, because you can't hold me accountable for something that's impossible to implement. And that's really, to me, the biggest challenge we're all going to face. Either stopping what they do before they do it by electing the right people, or making sure that once it happens, that those details don't harm the kids we're responsible for.
Yeah, I also think it's really important for us to maximize the opportunities to connect and engage with our elected officials. So either through the calls to action that come out from AASA, or while they're on break, bringing them into our schools. Whenever we can get an elected official into a school and they see the great things going on, it changes their perspective. And there's so many great things going on in so many schools across this country. We just need to get them in our schools. And then I think, if we can tackle, as either myself working with a group or a group of superintendents, if you can tackle one piece of legislation that you can lift bipartisanly every session or every couple sessions, all of a sudden you start having a voice because people are interested, because number one, they know you know what you're doing, and number two, you can become that go-to person. So it's not uncommon at all for me to get a text or a call from one of our state reps who's on the floor saying, this bill's getting called right now, what's going to be the impact on our district? And I can tell them that, and I think that's really great. But I think your question also almost comes with a secondary piece, and that is, what does it mean to be a leader today from a political perspective, right? And so I'm very cognizant about ensuring what our students, what our staff, what our community sees in me is a civic-minded leader who's civil, professional, and always thinking about sending that message that it's our obligation to transcend and lead, right? And that we can do it. And that we don't have to operate from a deficit perspective. We don't have to be talking about what's bad in our world and our community, we can talk about the amazing things going on in our schools and our communities and build from there. And that's a completely different approach than we see sometimes when you see our leaders talk. And so that's really important to me, that we live what we expect our students to become as they grow into leaders.
I'd just like to piggyback on what David just said in regards to our stories and why we become the leaders that we have been in the last several years. It's important that the stories about how we got to where we are also told. If you were to ask, again, an 8-year-old child who was the daughter of an immigrant family from mainland China and who grew up not knowing English and who lived in the back of a laundry, who had no resources at all, but came to love the world of school, public school, and the fact that it was public education that was able to have this family, this child, overcome all the obstacles, and that one day that little girl would become the superintendent of one of the finest school districts in Los Angeles County. That's a story that's important to share with others because it speaks volume about the hope that we all need to instill in others, that it's possible, that regardless of what demographics people start with, it's not where they're going to be ending with, that it doesn't determine their destiny. And so I know that for myself, the motto of demographics do not determine destiny is huge in our district. So the role of a superintendent in this political climate, in this national climate, is imperative. It's important. It's important to tell the stories. It's important to tell the values that we are so embraced with, so that we can provide that sense of hope to our students of the next generation that will take care of our country. And as I shared with the committee earlier this morning, one of my finest moments last year in the class of at Gar High School was when the most thunderous applause occurred because a young man was getting one of the highest honors in our school district as an AP scholar and received a full ride to one of the most prestigious universities, University of Southern California, University of California in San Diego. But this was a child who we all knew was homeless from the time he was in elementary school, middle school, and throughout his high school career. And yet he was able to overcome those very obstacles that I'm talking about. We've got to instill that hope, and that as superintendents leading the charges in our school districts, that's important for all of us to hear in our communities.
That's well said. That's incredible stories, and I think that's, public education has so many stories to share. I mean, just the great things that are happening in public education. So I think our political role starts there, locally first. You make sure we're telling the story locally. We're talking to the groups. We're out in the community. We have an event going on right now in our school system where it's a county-wide. 8,000 students across 3 school districts are all reading the same book, K through 5th grade, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But that event will put us on front page of the newspaper for the next 30 days. Because our newspaper is very much behind the event. And so that's political. I mean, it's a great event. It's a great initiative. We've got families reading together. There's a lot of good PR there. But at the end of the day, it builds support for public education, builds support for our schools. And those are the things we've got to do, very deliberate, strategic opportunities to tell our story, to tell our successes, and how we're taking all kids and doing all we can to meet their needs and propelling them for success. More broader than that local level is being active, and we can no longer, sit by idly and let things happen at the state and federal level. I mean, I'm very proud of a couple of things in Tennessee. I sit here today having no idea how we don't have voucher legislation in Tennessee. We had a governor that supported it and a huge majority of legislators that supported it. But somehow we're today, and both lead sponsors have said they won't propose it this year because they can't get the votes. It's dead. I mean, it's been proposed, and it was just a question of how big was it going to be, never a question of where we're going to have it or not, and now it's dead. Again, that's a huge piece. One of my favorite things about that is the folks most in favor of legislation proposed legislation banning superintendents from being lobbyists. from being in the hearings and from coming down. That didn't pass either, but it tells us that we were doing our job, that our voice was being heard, that our presence was being felt, and it was frustrating those trying to get things passed. And so that tells me that that works, that you've got to be personally have those relationships with the legislators. You've got to be willing to be there and be present and make those connections, and then talk about why that would hurt the mission of your school and your school system if that legislation passed or this passed. So we don't win them all, but we certainly can take some credit for winning some, and if we all rally together.
What would you advocate for if you were named Superintendent of the Year?
The conversation around equity is one that we have just since civil rights days talked about, but we've never really dissected what that really means when you try to put it into action. And I think that one of the things that we have neglected to do as a country is to define what is a rigorous education. What does it look like? Not just in Indiana, but as a nation, what do we expect all children to be able to achieve? And so I think, for me, talking about equity in a practical sense, what does it look like when you've achieved it? And for me, the concept of equity is every child has the opportunity, not just the opportunity, but it's their right, and we put structures in place that they reach that expectation of that rigorous education, and we wrap them around with all the services they need to get there. Because I have 30,000 students and none of them learn the same. So I think the concept of equity, but then the other part to that is the responsibility for us to be constantly looking at continuous improvement, examining data, knowing why we do things, knowing what's the result of what we put in place. But that conversation around a system, of course we have to pay attention to federal government, of course we have to pay attention to state legislators, but I think half the time things happen because we haven't defined at a local level what the expectation is. So sometimes we don't even know what to go and advocate for. So I think when we talk about equity, we talk about what it's supposed to look like in our community. We talk about what supports, what resources are needed. That puts us on firmer ground in terms of actually having a conversation with legislators, advocating for something. I think we start so big sometimes of what we're trying to tackle in education, and we wonder why we fail. When I talk to a parent, all they want to know is what I'm doing for their child. And I don't think we have spent enough time defining in all of our communities what it is we're going to guarantee will happen for that one child. What are the resources we need? What are the supports we need? We're doing it backwards. We do the law and then we worry about how it's impacting kids. Let's talk about the kids and then map what the laws ought to be to make sure we can get done what we have to do for kids. So equity lens for making decisions about what we actually should focus on.
Yeah, I would advocate for us to have a joyous, positive conversation about the power of the superintendency. I mean, I love being a public school superintendent, and I think, we should make sure that our conversations with aspiring and sitting superintendents are all about being positive and the power and the impact we have on our communities. The stories that you've heard today that I've had the fortune of hearing over the course of the last couple days, powerful, powerful impact, not just on the kids and on the parents, but on our communities as a whole. And if we want to stay the greatest, country that the world has ever seen, we need to make sure we're supporting that and ensuring that we have candidates for the superintendency that have that same mindset. And help remind all of us sometimes, that our job is not just to be inspirational and motivational, but aspirational with our kids and our adults. So we're thinking very carefully about every child, right? And providing an aspiration beyond what they walk through that schoolhouse door as a kindergartner, a fifth grader, a ninth grader. That we change the arc, the trajectory of their dreams and their families' dreams. That's how we get out and we break generational cycles of poverty, right? Is through creating, engaging, relevant experiences that students want to take advantage of. And making sure our adults have that positive mindset, that growth mindset. So when you have kids that are coming to you that may have multiple generations living in a one-bedroom apartment or who may be homeless, right? Who may be experiencing tons of trauma, and they're coming to school, that adult should not be thinking, how can I make their life easier, right? I'm going to pull them out of that AP class because I know what they're coming with. Absolutely not. We need to celebrate the resiliency of that child because they're coming to school every day. And most of the time they're coming on time. That should be celebrated, and we should increase our expectations for all of those children, every child, and our adults.
Thank you, David. One of the great things that I know you've already heard from my personal story is the fact that I do love public education. And certainly, one of the things that I would advocate is to continue supporting how we should all love public education as well, and the huge benefits that it could be derived for families, not just the lucky ones, but for all families. You know, my story is the story of thousands of students in my district. They may come from different countries, they may speak a different language, their circumstances may be slightly different, but it's the same story. And so public education should continue to be the equalizer, the leveler for students who don't have those resources and who can still be able to continue to see sort of their limitless possibilities. And I can see that because of my story in my school district. Just a while ago at lunchtime when I was talking about the Gallup poll that we all read every year, and how we view public education for those who are surveyed. They always say that public education is on the decline and that it's not doing well. I just heard it on television earlier this morning as well. But yet, when they are asked about their child's schools, how well are they doing? They just love their own schools. That's what we should be promoting, is that sense of being able to highlight and spotlight those great success stories that are a part of our lives here at this table today, as well as throughout the country. It's a promotion of being able to see that there are some extraordinary, simply extraordinary things that are going on every single day in every school in our country, and the fact that they should be celebrated and honored and should be continuously advocated as well.
I tell you, when I think about the future, what makes me more nervous than any policies and things that we've discussed is our teaching force. You know, who are going to be the teachers in the classrooms 10, 15, 20 years from now, so that we can maintain our role in public education as that great equalizer, as the vehicle for success for all students. I mean, we've got to put a highly effective teacher in front of every room. And when we look at across, you know, I come from a family of educators, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, my wife, my brother, sister. When we all get together, there's 18 educators in the room. We love public education. I think it's the greatest job in the world, public school teaching, most impactful thing a person can do. And I believe that, and it's the one. I mean, I've watched my mom and dad now, you know, been retired 20 years, and they maintain those relationships with so many of their students through social media and other vehicles. It's just an awesome thing to see. But when you take the power, you know, the power of a teacher who loves kids, genuinely loves kids, and really truly believes that every kid can learn, and won't take any excuse for them not learning, that's a powerful thing. And if you have a whole school of those types of teachers who take ownership for the success of every student and every teacher, I mean, in the whole school-wide, that's an you can't stop a school like that. They're not going to allow a student not to succeed. And that's that ownership of their learning. You know, that's what you want to instill. So how are we going to do that? Where's those teachers? So I think advocating first on the things outside the public school, which is attracting and recruiting folks to go into teaching at the college level. It's a challenge. It may be more challenging now than it's ever been. I would say it is. It's always been a hard job, harder now than ever, but the reward may be even greater now. And so selling that, getting those folks who want to do that because that's their calling in life, is to be a teacher, and then working with our higher ed institutions maybe to revamp how those teachers are trained so that they come in ready to meet the needs of diverse kids and all types of learners, and then inside our walls, as superintendents, school building administrators, supporting and developing those teachers, putting that robust evaluation system, all the supports and resources in place to move those teachers to get better and better and better. I think that's the only chance we've got. If we're going to be what we want to be in public education for years to come, in a society, not just, if we want to be the society and the nation we want to be, 20, 30 years from now, we've got to have that next generation of teachers.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes, right away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon Adams Taylor from AASA, and I want to say thank you, Wendy. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mike. You have just, I just feel, I have goosebumps, that our children's futures are in good hands. And I just am appreciative to have been able to be a part of this discourse. Thank you very much. Each of you in your own way touched on equity in your districts. AASA aspires to be an equity leader in education. So my question is, what steps would you suggest that the oldest and largest and clearly the best organization for superintendents in the country take if it's serious about equity in education? What do you want your leadership organization to do?
I think, let me talk about how we are approaching equity from our district. I've been in the district 14 years. And one of the mistakes that we allow people to make is to tie equity, cultural proficiency, and the minute you start talking, we start talking about, well, you're calling me a racist because I'm not taking care of all kids. So what we are doing is just taking a step back and starting with what every single teacher understands their responsibility is, which is teaching and learning, and that cultural, the curriculum perspective. And as we started our conversation, I had all of my high schools survey which kids are in which classes. Now, we track that anyway. But when you have them look at which kids are in which classes, it's so evident that we have put barriers in the way of students, and students are not going to be able to meet these new pathways our states set out because we're not even giving them access to the right courses. So you can get to the equity conversation by not blaming, but just establishing this is the expectation. We have to change what courses we're offering, which means for kids to walk, we all brag about our graduation rate. Graduation rate starts in 3rd grade. We start tracking and sorting which kids are going to be in those honors classes in 3rd grade. We really don't hold people responsible for having a 3-year-old to 12th grade curriculum. Our middle school, high schools, elementary schools, they don't feel responsibility for connecting. And so part of our equity conversation is we're just going to bulldog and just constantly press our language arts curriculum and our math curriculum will be the district curriculum. We're going to stop playing around with what you're going to teach. Because if kids don't have proper math background in 3rd grade, they will never pass Algebra 2. And so I think the thing that you could do as an organization is some of the masterful work you've already done around curriculum audits, helping people understand how do you get teachers immersed. Most of my elementary teachers are afraid of math because they've been told they should be. I don't know about you, I'm struggling to find math and science teachers. So we're going to all have to work on how we're going to give teachers those skills because everybody's not going to have a math degree. But my babies aren't going to get through a pathway if I don't have solid math skills. So I think we've got to get back to what we used to pride ourselves in doing. We've added so much on the plates of educators. People, we're supposed to be teaching. That's our core business. And so for us, that's our equity conversation, starting with, well, who gets to take advanced math? Who's in the AP courses? And so that's the support is to help people understand how to do that. And you have wonderful resources. We talk around everything else, but at the end of the day, we stop kids from getting into high level because we track and sort them. The Dana Center said to us, you're tracking kids because you track what you teach. And that's really something to stop to think about. The courses you offer kids determines which ones are going to make it and which ones aren't.
So I come to this from a really interesting perspective, right? A white man of positional power with two African-American children. And so when people engage the conversation and start the conversation about how we need to not see color, right? They're full of it. We can't go there, right? The conversations I'm having with a 5 and a 7-year-old are not the same conversations that somebody with my color skin and white children is having, right? We're already talking about how our children will need to behave when they are stopped by police. Right? That's a different conversation, right? So we have to be honest about that. And I think that's the first thing we have to do, right? And so for us, I needed, as the leader, to set a context for the conversation. And I think that's something that ASA could help us with. How do you create that context for the conversation in your community and your district? So we did a couple book reads. Despite Best Intentions was probably the most powerful book for our team to look at. And we've spent a lot of time talking about, in our district, we always use data to inform and enhance, not to rank, rate, or judge. And that's not, outside forces may use it to judge us. We don't do that. So our next step then, and this happened 2 years ago, was to give all of our division heads, our department chairs, and all of our teachers the demographic breakdown of the students in each class and how the students were performing in class by demographic. And that was by far the most powerful thing we did. The day we did that, we had teachers walking around crying because they didn't know. It was subtle. That goes back to the fact that we have to help them learn and grow. But since then, what we've been able to do, and I would encourage our organization to do the same thing, is we had to set a target, a measurable goal that we were all committed to as an organization. And we believe completely in Marzano's work. So as an institution, as a school district, we have non-negotiables. And when we establish a non-negotiable, it is not up for further debate. You're not going to bring it back. We're not going to talk about whether, right? Once we label it a non-negotiable, then we figure out the how. And so it's a non-negotiable for us that by 2021, the demographics in all of our different levels of classes will reflect the demographics of that school. And each department, each division is now creating, I just saw the first drafts last week, strategic plans to get there. And it's going to look slightly different in each department based on where they're at, right? But we needed to set that targeted goal and all be focused with moving forward in order to even begin seeing some growth. And the other thing I would just mention, based on what Mike said and Sharon, what you said, is I think we also have a moral obligation to grow our own from our teachers, a teacher prep program. We have an ed prep program in our district where kids can identify the end of their freshman or sophomore year if they want to be a teacher. Right? And then we give them early college credit. We give them field experiences in 4 different settings. Our partner universities agree to cut a year off of their post-high school experience, and we guarantee them a student teaching experience and an interview in our greater community. So what we've done, and we also, Dan was nice enough to come 2 years ago when we launched our first ed prep. We celebrate it. We do it like a Division I signing. Everybody comes together, they're in the theater, they're up on stage, they all get their own little pen, they all sign a piece of paper. We elevate the profession of teaching because we believe it should be. But last year, what we did is I paid a couple $100 to have a stipended position in each building to tap kids on the shoulder and tell them they'd be good teachers. Because most of us as teachers, someone told us we'd be a good teacher. And I asked each of those stipended positions to ensure that who they were tapping and ensuring they signed up for our ed prep pathway, again, was reflective of the diversity of our demographics. And this year's class, we have over 44% of our students that are in the ed pathway program that come from underrepresented backgrounds. So we're making some, now it's going to be a couple years before they get through, but I'm really, really proud of our initial efforts and hope we can continue them.
I know AASA has done a lot of work already on the issues related to equity. If I were to suggest how to expand or to add to it, I would only look at going beyond the equity related to cultural proficiency, as well as mentioned by Wendy earlier. And that includes, for example, in our equity report to all districts in California, we are also expected to improve in other areas. When I mentioned the multiple measures approach in California, we're also looking at the non-academic components, that includes who's being suspended in our schools. Are the students completing A through G in our district, A through G requirements in order to be prepared for college? Are they college and career ready? Are the students graduating on time? So there are many other factors that are included in our equity report. Are our students engaged? Do they feel engaged when they're in our schools? Do the parents feel engaged as part of decision-making groups with the school districts? So those are the other areas that I would recommend that we continue to look at deeply, because there's data that supports that. The importance of looking at non-academic areas in addition to the other metrics that I just mentioned. Those are also important for all of us as we continue to look at how do we improve in the areas of equity. I know that in our district we have managed well. We still have work to do, but I feel pretty good that we're on the right track, because we're, again, moving away from that single test score into a more of a multiple metrics approach to looking at how well our students are doing, how well our schools are doing, and as a result, how well we are doing as a district.
You know, like the others mentioned and talked about, you know, we're looking at, you know, equity is not a mission statement or something just in your mission plan, but it's actionable. So we've got to look at concrete things that we're measuring and things that we're doing to provide equity. And like Dave talked about, you know, setting targets, you know, looking at whether it's the percent of students in our honors and AP classes and looking at the breakdown there, or just access to the different pathways and ready graduate and all those things. I think, you know, just maybe as an organization, you know, kind of the rubric checklist of here we are equity-wise by the practices that we could have in our buildings that exasperate the situation. You know, how you assign teachers. You know, because we still have high schools certainly across the country where there's that mentality of I've paid my dues, I get to teach. Kind of like the college professor, where you don't see the best ones until you get to graduate school. They don't mess with freshmen. You know, we have that still in many of our high schools, and you know, and I'm a firm believer that the best teachers ought to teach the kids who need them the most. And so we've got to look at how we're assigning teachers and the practices that we could have in place that are maybe have become traditions and almost the norm they're making the problem worse. And one other is, you know, as we all move towards this digital conversion and we move from a paper-based classroom to more digital, we saw immediately when we did that in Maryville that could make the problem worse. And I think others have experienced the same thing. And so we have achieved 100% broadband access for all of our students. And one of the best pieces of legislation that came out of our state last year a bill passed to provide broadband through all the rural areas of our state, and so I know we're looking at something like that nationally. I think this gap in technology and technology access is going to just compound the gap in achievement and inequities that we see if we don't bridge that very, very soon. So I think that's certainly a piece of legislation that I think we all could get behind at the state and federal level.
I think we have time for one more question. All right.
I'll ask a question.
Oh, nice. You get to. All right.
So, one of the criticisms that's constantly levied on public education is that we're not doing right by kids, right? And to some extent, knowing all of the wonderful things that we're doing, you know, all of you have said, there are so many things that we need to change. And I think most of us will agree that here we are in the 21st century, and in many cases, public education is still a 20th century affair. What are you doing in your district to transform education radically from education as it exists today?
I think the difficulty, it's not impossible. I think the difficulty is linked to the first question you asked about the federal and state. I think there are times that our state and federal governments get in the way, and they have systems set up that just perpetuate that, keeping the 1950 education system going, even when they do things like No Child Left Behind, which are supposed to blow open the gates. I think when you think about what education has to look like and what we're actually preparing kids for one of the things we're looking to make sure we do is to be as connected to our community as we possibly can, and that even though we have 53 buildings, all of those buildings are just extensions of the community. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. All of our schools have business partners. Our state's now mandating internships, but we get our kids, we have a regional vocational center where almost everything we do is sponsored by one of the major employers in our community, because I'll tell you, for example, refrigeration, air conditioning repair. There was a shortage in the community, and the company that needed the workers actually paid for the equipment, built the space for us, gave us the equipment to train students. So I think we're all going to have to expand the walls of what school is. But I think the other part that we owe kids is this, and I think we've mentioned it in different ways, this conversation around citizenship. I think one of the things that we have to think about as our responsibility is not just to teach them to read and write, but to teach our kids to think. And so we're going to have educational opportunities where kids get to solve problems. We've got a new tech. We have a new tech middle school and high school, but that whole project-based learning almost has to become the philosophy, because we're in a world where most of the jobs aren't even here yet that we're training our kids to get into. So it's kind of a multifaceted thing. Stop thinking that our schools are just the buildings I'm responsible for. How do we interact with all of the community agencies, our mental health organizations? Our hospitals are providing clinics and nurses for us. So making sure that the community owns the educational process, but then making sure that we're constantly providing opportunities for our kids to become good citizens, but also to problem solve. And we used to tell all the kids that their goal was to go to college. Well, that's not true. There are kids who graduate from our regional vocational center that are making more money than kids who went to college are making 10 years later. So we've got to change our view of what we're actually preparing kids for, but then use the community and make sure that we are not out of touch. So it's just, to me, us needing to change our 1950 view of what education is. And all of the education we provide our kids can't happen within the walls of the classroom. We have to look at how we have to use all those partnerships and how we have to make sure that our kids are absolutely solid, problem-solving, good citizen people, as well as literate.
I think it starts at the very micro level. We don't buy desks anymore, right? I mean, we shouldn't be having desks in rows, right? We need our classrooms to be reflective of the office spaces of today and tomorrow, right? So that flexible seating, the ability to collaborate, the ability to move spaces around depending on what the need of that class is in a given day. I think that's important. I think unleashing the freedom of our teachers to dream and supporting that is really powerful. I mean, when NCLB came in, everybody, all of us, ended up in this spot where we were all teaching to the same thing. And I think sucked a lot of the joy out of teaching. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we have such a teacher shortage. We need to put the joy back in. The way you do it is to support teachers' love of innovation. So how can they best serve their students? And then finding creative ways to play within the rules of the game, but creatively. So we've got more and more blended courses now where students might come to class 2 or 3 days a week, and then they may be doing independent work other times. Truly personalize that learning opportunities for kids. And then I think it goes exactly to what we just heard. I think we have to rethink what community partnerships mean. Historically, community partnerships were we asked, they gave, we said thank you. Right? We need to start talking about what's the return on investment for that community partner, right? So in our app development and our website development classes, our kids for their capstone project go out and adopt a small business in the community that can't afford to have somebody there to develop their own website or app. They work with that business owner to create an app or a website. And just think about what happens, right? So the student has to go make a pitch initially that they're going to do this work. Then they have this employer-employee type relationship. The student has to go on their own and create the website or create the app, come back and then pitch it and sell the finished product to that business owner. Now what happens is that student gets something for his or her portfolio that they would have never gotten before. That business owner gets something sure he would have never been able to afford before, and I get a lifelong supporter of public education. And so when you think about how we can do that and how we can scale that, I'll pass the mic, but we had our industry partner breakfast. We have over 450 industry partners in our district. And I had somebody come up to me, and he was in our manufacturing park in the northern part of the district, and he said, "You saved me $15,000. I said, "There's our education foundation person. Go talk to her," right? And I said, "So tell me the story." And he said he had an intern who came to him and said, "I think your storeroom is really inefficiently designed." And the guy said, "You're right, it is." And the student said, "Could you let me have a crack at it, at redesigning it and coming back and making a pitch to you?" So the student went off, did this work, 2 weeks later came back, and using his oral communication skills, made a pitch to this manager of this storage facility, and it was awesome. It was awesome. That's the value add our kids can bring to our industry and community partners if we're given and if they're given the chance. And I think it's completely rethinking how we can imagine that partnership that's going to allow them to set themselves up for a world we can't imagine, one that's going to reinvent itself several times over their lifetime. I mean, their children, their grandchildren are going to see the 22nd century. I mean, think about that. Think about how our classrooms are now. That's crazy. We've got to get out there and rethinking and reimagining.
Actually, I do like the question, Dan, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about not so much programs and practices that are in place in our district, but a structure and a system in our district that we've transformed in the last, I'm going to say, over 15 years in ABC. The whole area of labor management, when I heard Mike say, we are only as good as the highly effective teachers who are with our students. And so how do we get there? And the last 15 years, our district has been a model for collaborative labor management partnerships. By that, I mean, it's not just a matter of all of us getting along, because I know there are many districts who get along with their labor groups. It's really about putting into place opportunities for our teachers to have representation at many of the different committees that we have, whether it's the development of curriculum, whether it's looking at health benefits for employees. So we have had structures and systems in place where for many years now, teachers' voices, classified personnel voices are part of the entire system. We only go forward with major changes, whether it's in technology or whether it's in academic services, with the inclusion of these representatives in our committees. Hundreds of teachers were involved in the development of the new curriculum when California adopted the Common Core standards, now called the California State Standards, as part of the new direction in English language arts and in math, and now science and history, social science. It's the ability for our labor groups to partner with us on these various new directions. As a result of this system, there's an incredible amount of collaboration and cooperation that drives these changes, whether it's, for example, when we talk about evaluations of teachers. The teachers are harder on each other than the administrators. They help us to make sure that we have the best highly qualified teachers in front of our students. They help us to move out the teachers and counsel them out into a different profession. Whether it's looking at adopting the entire new technology we call TIP, Technology Integration Project, where students have their one-to-one devices, but the devices themselves don't mean much. It's the training that goes along with the teachers that has to accompany that. And so for the unions to collaborate with us, to partner with us on rolling this out throughout the entire district with 3,500 employees involved, it's something to consider. We are now collaborating with California Department of Education. They have a labor management initiative called the LMI that they are working on anchoring ABC Unified School District to host West Coast Labor Management Institutes for other school districts around the country and around California, because the system itself has great promise to making sure that when we have these new initiatives, it's rolled out properly with inclusive involvement of the different groups, from management, administration, to classified, as well as our certificated staff. So it's that labor management, collaboration, and partnership that can transform these new ideas into action.
I think there's some significant changes, certainly, and I'm very proud of where we are and the changes that have been made in just fundamentally changing teaching and learning. One thing that will never change, ever change, is the importance of the teacher, but in the relationship between that adult and those children. So we want to maintain that, and so whatever structures we have in place, that student-teacher relationship is really ultimately the key to success for many of our students, for that engagement that brings. But I think what we've tried to do, and I think the path we've taken, is to kind of cast that vision for what the experience ought to be for students, what the day ought to look like, what the role of the teacher is as facilitator more than the deliverer of information, and the students working together and the project based, and then that leads to the teachers coming, and we need technology, and so we go one-to-one, and then we need flexible seating. So all the desks are out and we have flexible seating, but if it's teacher driven, because the vision was here and that was the picture we were seeing, to get there, they needed those things. And so they're coming and they're asking for them, and they push for them. That takes the buy-in, and so things look differently. So when you go through the classrooms, you'll see a lot of student choice and student voice and the pathways. But I also think, from the teacher standpoint, I think there's been a huge change, not only in their role in the classroom, but in through technology, the ability to collaborate beyond the walls we used to talk about teachers being in a silo and not even collaborating next door. Then we kind of, POC movement and all that, we did better there. But now, we've got, several of our teachers collaborating with 8, 9, 10 high schools across the state of Tennessee that they maybe all teach AP Physics. And so 10 of them, through our learning management system, that we're all using the same system. So it's as easy for them to collaborate on lesson planning and assessments with those 10 other high schools as it is if somebody was right next door. And so I think, nationwide, hopefully that's kind of one of my dreams, and I think you certainly can see happening in the future, is the teacher collaboration look very, very different and just empower. When Douglas Reeves talks about, the primary job of administrators is reducing the variability among teachers, and we used to just think of that in our building, is make sure all first grade teachers, you got the same type of lesson. Hopefully we can talk about that across the whole state or the whole country, reducing the variability among teachers by bringing everyone up, because they're all working together and collaborating and sharing.
Well, thanks again for everybody. Maybe we should all give them a round of applause.
I invite all of you to Tennessee
Yes.
on February 15th, where on the big stage, the announcement will be made which one of these 4 outstanding leaders will be our national superintendent.